The champagne flute felt cold and alien in Alara Vance's hand. Around her, the ballroom of the Shilla Soul glittered. A universe of silk, diamonds, and forced laughter celebrating the merger of two Korean conglomerates disguised as a wedding. She was an island of stillness in the swirling current, the crimson of her gown a stark slash of color against the polite pastels of the other guests. Her bodyguards, Marcus and David, stood a discreet but absolute distance away, their dark suits a silent promise of a perimeter no one would cross. Being the CEO of Vance Industries meant she was never truly alone, a fact that had felt like a comfort after Liam died, but now felt like a cage. She was watching the bride and groom, a pair of strangers whose union was a footnote in a stock market report, when she felt a shift in the room's atmosphere. It was subtle, a change in barometric pressure that only predators and prey ever notice. Her eyes scanned the crowd, past the politicians and their wives, past the rival tech moguls, and landed on him. He stood near the French doors leading to the gardens, not speaking to anyone, yet commanding more space than any other person in the room. His suit was a masterpiece of black wool, tailored so precisely it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. He wasn't loud or ostentatious. He was the opposite. He was a pocket of absolute silence in the cacophony, his presence a gravitational force that bent the light and sound around him. He turned his head, and his eyes, dark and depthless, found hers across the expanse of marble floor. They held her gaze without apology, without invitation. It was a look of simple, unnerving assessment. Alara felt a cold prickle along her spine. This man was not on the guest list she had reviewed. He was not a part of this world of negotiated power and polite smiles. He was something else entirely, something ancient and dangerous that had slipped through the cracks of civilization. He began to move. He didn't weave through the crowd. The crowd parted for him. People stepped aside without seeming to know why, their conversations faltering as he passed. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with the raw power coiled in his shoulders. Every step was deliberate, his destination unmistakable. Her. Marcus and David shifted, their bodies subtly angling to intercept.
They were the best.
Unflappable, professional, two mountains of muscle and training. As the man drew closer, Marcus took a half-step forward, a silent, courteous denial of entry into their principal's space. David's hand twitched, a barely perceptible motion toward the inside of his jacket. The man stopped a respectable 10 feet away. He didn't look at her bodyguards. His focus remained entirely on Alara. A small, humorless smile touched his lips, a gesture that did not reach his cold, watchful eyes. He inclined his head slightly. It was in that small movement, as the chandelier light slid across his throat, that she saw it. The world stopped. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. Around his neck, resting against the crisp white of his collar, was a gold chain.
Not just any chain.
A thick, Byzantine link, its intricate pattern catching the light like dragon scales. Liam's chain. The chain she had bought him from a small, dusty shop in Florence on their first anniversary. The chain he had sworn he would never take off. The chain that the coroner's report had listed among his personal effects. The chain that was supposed to be in a velvet-lined box in a vault in New York, along with the rest of the man she had buried 2 years ago. Her breath hitched. The glass in her hand trembled. It was impossible. A copy, it had to be. A coincidence. But her heart hammered against her ribs, screaming a truth her mind refused to accept. She knew the exact weight of it, the way one of the links was ever so slightly flattened on the edge from when he dropped it once. From across the room, she could almost see the imperfection. The man started to turn away, accepting the silent refusal of her security. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Alara's shock. She couldn't let him leave. She couldn't live another second without knowing. Her voice, when it came out, was a low command, slicing through the air with the authority she used to command boardrooms. Wait. Marcus and David glanced back at her, their expressions questioning. Let him pass, she ordered, her gaze locked on the stranger. the stranger with her dead husband's ghost around his neck. He turned back slowly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. For the first time that night, Alara Vance felt utterly, terrifyingly out of her depth. And she walked toward it anyway. He closed the distance between them, stopping just beyond arm's reach. The air thickened, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the polite society surrounding them. Close up, he was even more imposing. His features were sharp, carved from unforgiving stone, and a faint scar cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny flaw in an otherwise perfect, dangerous mask. He smelled of cedar and something else, something like cold night air and smoke. "Kwon Jinwoo," he said. His voice was a low rumble, smooth and deep, a sound that seemed to vibrate in her bones. It wasn't a question or an introduction. It was a statement. "Alara Vance," she replied, her own voice betraying none of the chaos storming inside her. She met his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. She would not show weakness. Not here. Not in front of him. "I am aware," he said. Vance Industries' recent acquisition of Omnicore was digressive. Impressive. He was testing her, speaking the language of her world, but it felt like an ill-fitting costume. This man didn't care about acquisitions or stock prices. He dealt in a different currency. She played along, her mind racing, trying to formulate a plan, a way to isolate him, to get the answer she desperately needed. "We don't believe in half measures," she said, her tone cool and professional. "A philosophy I can appreciate," he murmured, his eyes dropping for a fraction of a second to the pulse hammering at the base of her throat before returning to her face. He saw it. He knew he had unsettled her. She needed to control this encounter. "The gardens are less crowded," she said, gesturing toward the doors he'd been standing near. It was a risk, leaving the relative safety of the crowded room, but it was one she had to take. She needed answers more than she needed air. He gave a slight, formal bow of his head. "Lead the way." She turned, giving Marcus and David a look that told them to stay put but stay close. They didn't like it. She could feel their disapproval like a physical weight on her back as she walked away, this dangerous stranger following a step behind her. The cool night air of the garden was a relief against her flesh skin. The city of souls sprawled below them, a breathtaking tapestry of light and shadow. They stopped at a stone balustrade overlooking the view. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not empty. It was heavy with unspoken questions and hidden threats. Alara turned to face him, dispensing with all pretense. Her heart was a cold, hard knot in her chest. "The chain," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Around your neck. Where did you get it?" Kwon Jinwoo's expression did not change. He reached up, his long, elegant fingers brushing against the heavy gold links. The gesture was casual, proprietary. It was a claim. "An interesting piece, isn't it?" he said, his voice maddeningly calm. It was payment for a debt. From a man who had a habit of making promises he could not keep. "What man?" she pressed, the words tight in her throat. He looked out over the city, a flicker of something dark and old in his eyes. "In my world, Mr. Kwon is a title. In yours, a name. But in both, loyalty is the only currency with any real value. Trust, once broken, can never be reforged. I learned that lesson from a man I considered a brother. He sold information to my rivals, a betrayal that cost me a great deal. It cost him more. This chain," he finally looked back at her, his gaze pinning her in place, "is a reminder that all debts are eventually paid, one way or another." His story was a warning, a piece of his bloody history offered up as a deflection. He was talking about betrayal, about a trusted colleague who had turned on him, but every word felt like a stone being laid on her husband's grave. A sharp crack echoed from the street below. It sounded like a car backfiring, but Jinwoo reacted with inhuman speed. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between them, his hand gripping her arm, pulling her away from the railing. He spun her around, pressing her back against the cold stone of the building, his body a solid, warm shield in front of hers. Stay down, he hissed, his voice a low command right next to her ear. His breath was warm against her skin. Another crack, louder this time, and the sound of stone chipping just inches from where her head had been. It wasn't a car. It was a gunshot. The danger wasn't a story from his past. It was here, now, sharp and lethal. They were plastered together in the shadows of an alcove, his entire body covering hers. She could feel the hard planes of his chest against her back, the steady, unhurried beat of his heart. The scent of cedar and smoke was overwhelming, intoxicating. In the terrifying intimacy of the moment, she was acutely aware of the sheer physical power he possessed, held in perfect, deliberate control. Her own body was rigid with shock and adrenaline. She had chosen to come out here. She had walked willingly into his world, and his world was trying to kill them both. Shadows detached themselves from the darkness of the garden. Two of his men, dressed in the same impeccable black suits, materialized with guns in their hands, their movements silent and efficient. They fanned out, securing the perimeter, their eyes scanning the street below. One of them spoke into his wrist, his voice a low, urgent stream of Korean. Jin-woo didn't move. He kept her pinned against the wall, a human shield, until one of his men gave a sharp, clipped nod. Only then did he relax his posture, stepping back, putting a sliver of space between them. The sudden absence of his warmth left her feeling cold and exposed. "You can't leave," he stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "It wasn't a request." "I have my own security," she shot back, her own voice sharper than she intended. "They are good at protecting a CEO from paparazzi and corporate rivals," he said, his gaze dismissive. "They are not equipped for this."
You were seen with me.
"You were standing next to me when the attempt was made. To my enemies, you are now a liability. Or leverage." The cold reality of his words washed over her. He was right. In the space of 10 minutes, she had gone from a guest at a wedding to a target in a war she didn't understand. His men flanked them now, escorting them back through a private entrance, away from the glittering ballroom and its oblivious occupants. The transition was jarring. One moment, she was in a world of champagne and civility. The next, she was in a sterile service corridor, the air humming with the sound of industrial elevators. As they moved toward a black, armored sedan waiting in the underground garage, chaos erupted. A dark car with no lights on screeched around the corner, its engine roaring. Jin-woo's men shouted. He shoved Alara into the back seat of their vehicle, throwing himself in after her just as the other car slammed into their rear quarter panel. The impact was violent, throwing her across the seat and hard against Jin-woo's chest. The world was a blur of screeching tires and the sickening crunch of metal. His arm wrapped around her, holding her secure as his driver expertly spun the wheel, the heavy sedan fishtailing before lurching forward, accelerating down the ramp into the Seoul night. Through the rear window, she saw his men engaging the other vehicle, the brief, terrifying flashes of muzzle fire illuminating the concrete dimness of the garage. She pushed herself upright, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Jin-woo was on his phone, speaking in rapid, guttural Korean. There was no panic in his voice, only cold, precise command. He was not a man caught in violence, he was a man orchestrating it. In that moment, seeing the lethal focus in his eyes, she understood. He moved through this world of death and danger, as if he were born to it. And she had just seen how easily it could swallow her whole. They drove in silence through the glittering, rain-slicked streets of the city. He ended his call, and the silence in the car became a living thing. They arrived at a residential skyscraper that pierced the clouds, its dark glass reflecting the city lights like 1,000 obsidian eyes. The elevator ride to the penthouse was swift and silent. The apartment was a fortress of glass and steel, with panoramic views of the Han River. It was minimalist, impersonal, more a strategic lookout than a home. He walked to the vast window, his back to her. "You want to know about the chain?" he said, his voice quiet. "You want to know about your husband?" Alara's breath caught. "What about him?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Your husband, Liam Vance, is not dead. The floor fell away. The air rushed from her lungs. The immaculately constructed world she had lived in for the past 2 years shattered into a million pieces. The grief, the mourning, the lonely nights, all of it built on a lie. A lie told by the man she had loved. He owed my organization a significant amount of money, Jin-woo continued, his voice relentless. And something far more valuable. He stole proprietary data, logistics routes, the names of my key people in the West. He faked his death to disappear, to sell that information to my rivals, the Choi clan. Rage, pure and glacial, replaced the shock. It was a cold, clarifying fury. Liam hadn't died. He had abandoned her. He had used her grief as a cover for his escape. The chain was collateral, Jin-woo said, his eyes watching her every reaction. A down payment on a debt he never intended to honor. Ilara stood frozen, the pieces of her life rearranging themselves into a new, hideous picture. Liam wasn't the brilliant, loving man she had married and mourned. He was a thief, a traitor, a coward. I want to find him, she said, her voice low and brittle with fury. I intend to, Jin-woo replied. No, she said, stepping forward, her eyes locking with his. I will help you. I know his habits, his passwords, the way he thinks. I have resources you don't. My company's data analysis capabilities are second to none. I will use them. And in return, when you find him, I want to be in the room. She was crossing a line, she knew it, offering the assets of her legitimate, multi-billion-dollar corporation to a man who was, by any definition, a crime lord. But the principles that had guided her life felt like a distant memory. All that mattered was the cold, hard need for a reckoning. A slow, dangerous smile touched Jin-woo's lips. It was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it was terrifying. A mutually beneficial arrangement, he said. The days that followed bled into one another. The penthouse became their command center. Ilara worked relentlessly, fueled by coffee and a burning rage. She and her team in New York, under the guise of a security audit, began to sift through terabytes of data, hunting for the digital ghost of Liam Vance. She worked alongside Jin-woo, the two of them falling into an easy, intense rhythm. The proximity was a constant, low-grade hum of awareness. She learned the sound of his footsteps on the marble floor, the scent of his cologne, the way he would go utterly still when concentrating. One night, they were hunched over a laptop, tracing a series of encrypted financial transactions. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He looked at her, his gaze intense. You are not like him, he said, the words coming out of nowhere. His voice was quiet. You look at a debt and see an obligation. He looked at it and saw an opportunity. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation, a clinical assessment, but it landed with the weight of something far more intimate. It was an acknowledgement that he saw her, truly saw her, in a way she hadn't felt seen in years. The confession slipped from her lips before she could stop it. I told myself this was about finding him, she said, not looking up from the screen. But that's not the only reason I'm still here. The silence that followed was charged, dangerous. He didn't reply, but she felt his gaze on her, heavy and searching. The unspoken truth of her words hung between them, a fragile, explosive thing. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it. It was a high-resolution photograph of the Vance Industries building in New York, taken from a hotel room across the street. Beneath it was a simple, chilling caption. We know where you sleep.
The Choi clan.
They knew who she was. They knew she was with Jin-woo. The threat was no longer just about him. They had made it about her. She showed the phone to Jin-woo. His face became a mask of cold fury. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He took the phone from her hand, his knuckles white. The war had just become personal. They made a mistake, he said, his voice lethally soft. They think you are my weakness. They are about to learn you are my strength. Using Ilara's data analysis, they found him. Liam was liquidating the last of his stolen assets, preparing to flee the country for good from a private airfield outside Incheon. Jinwoo's plan was surgical and swift: a small team to intercept, retrieve the data drives, and capture Liam. "I'm going with you," Ilara said. It was not a request. Jinwoo studied her face. "It will be dangerous." "My whole life has been dangerous for the past week," she countered. "He made this my fight. I intend to finish it." He held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. The airfield was a desolate place, smelling of jet fuel and rain. The night was dark, the air heavy. They moved into position in the shadows of a hangar, watching the small private jet being prepped on the tarmac. Everything went wrong at once. Headlights flooded the airfield as two black sedans screeched to a halt, cutting off their exit.
The Choi clan.
Someone had tipped them off. Gunfire erupted, the night exploding in a cacophony of sound and light. Jinwoo's men were disciplined, returning fire with deadly precision, but they were outnumbered. In the chaos, Ilara saw Liam running from the jet, a briefcase clutched in his hand. He saw her at the same moment. His face, once so beloved, was now a mask of desperation and fear. He sprinted toward her, not for a reunion, but for an opportunity. He grabbed her, yanking her in front of him, one arm clamped around her throat, the other holding a pistol to her head. "Kwan," he screamed, his voice raw with panic. "Call them off. Call them off or she dies." Jinwoo froze, his own weapon lowering slightly. His face was unreadable, but Ilara could see the conflict warring in his eyes. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Liam's arm was a vice, cutting off her air. Her survival instincts, honed in ruthless boardrooms, screamed at her.
She would not be a pawn.
She would not be a shield. She remembered a self-defense class Liam had insisted they take together years ago, a lifetime ago. Heel to the instep, elbow to the ribs. Always. With all her strength, she stomped her 4-inch heel down onto his foot. He roared in pain, his grip momentarily loosening. It was all she needed. She drove her elbow back, hard, into his solar plexus. The air whooshed out of him, and his arm fell away. She dropped to the ground, scrambling clear just as Jinwoo fired. The shot was perfect, precise, hitting the gun in Liam's hand and sending it skittering across the wet tarmac. The Choi clan's attack faltered, and within minutes, Jinwoo's men had subdued them. Silence descended on the airfield, broken only by the sound of rain and the groans of the wounded. Ilara pushed herself to her feet, her body trembling with adrenaline. Jinwoo walked toward her, his eyes bypassing the captured, pathetic form of her husband to focus solely on her. He stopped in front of her, his expression intense. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer comfort. "He used you as a shield," Jinwoo said, his voice flat, laced with a cold, bottomless contempt for the man on the ground. He looked at her then, and the ice in his eyes seemed to melt for just an instant, revealing the fire beneath. "I would burn my entire empire to the ground before I used you as a shield." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something more primal. A statement of fact. A claim. In his world, it was the only vow that mattered. She watched as his men hauled Liam to his feet. The man she thought she'd married was gone, replaced by this cowering stranger. The love she'd felt for him, the grief she'd carried, it had all curdled into a hollow ache. That part of her life was over, burned away in the fire of his betrayal. She had paid a price to be standing here, the final death of her own innocence. As the first light of dawn began to gray the eastern sky, they stood on the empty tarmac. The rain had stopped. The air was clean and cold. "You can go back to New York," Jinwoo said quietly. "My debt to you is paid. I will ensure your safety from a distance. No one will ever touch you." He was offering her an exit, an escape back to her old life. "Or," he said, his voice dropping lower, "you can stay." He held out his hand. Lying on his palm, gleaming in the pale morning light, was the Byzantine gold chain. Liam's chain, her chain. She looked from the heavy gold to his dark, unreadable eyes. He was offering her the past back, a relic of a life built on a lie. She could take it, and with it, her freedom. Alara didn't take the chain. Instead, she reached out and gently pushed his hand toward his own chest, her fingers brushing his as she closed his hand around the gold. "It looks better on you," she said. Her voice was steady. It wasn't the answer he had asked for, but it was the only one that mattered.
It was a choice.
A truth. He didn't smile, but a new understanding passed between them, solid and certain in the cold morning air. She was staying, and nothing would ever be the same.